The most influential people in your life rarely announce themselves. They do not demand attention. They do not force agreement. They do not stand over others issuing commands. And yet, opportunities seem to move toward them. Resistance seems to dissolve around them. Conversations drift in the direction they prefer, and decisions somehow arrive where they wanted them to go. Most people assume this happens because of charisma, confidence, or luck, but something far more subtle is at work. The strongest influence is often invisible, because the moment people feel controlled, they begin to resist. The moment they feel free, they lower their guard. The Stoics understood a truth about human nature that remains just as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. Human beings value their sense of freedom almost above everything else. People can endure uncertainty, discomfort, and even hardship, but they struggle to tolerate the feeling that someone else is steering their choices. This is why direct pressure so often fails. It collides with pride, identity, and the desire for autonomy. Yet when an idea feels self-discovered, when a decision feels like it emerged from one's own reasoning, resistance quietly fades. What appears to be independence is not always independence. Sometimes it is influence wearing a different mask. The uncomfortable reality is that many of the decisions people defend most passionately may have been shaped long before they became aware of them. A suggestion becomes a belief becomes a decision becomes a direction for an entire life, and somewhere along the way, the illusion of complete independence remains untouched. Understanding this does not make a person cynical, it makes them aware, and awareness, as the Stoics repeatedly reminded us, is where freedom begins. Most people think influence begins with persuasion, a conversation, an argument, a carefully constructed explanation, something visible, something obvious. Yet some of the strongest influences begin long before a single word is spoken. They begin in silence, at the moment something appears slightly out of reach. A possibility that once seemed ordinary suddenly becomes interesting. An opportunity that received little attention begins occupying more space in the mind. The opportunity itself has not changed. The change happens internally. Value begins to rise not because reality changed, but because perception did. The mind starts assigning greater importance to something simply because access appears uncertain. This reaction is so common that it often goes unnoticed. People assume they are responding to genuine desire when they may actually be responding to perceived scarcity. The distinction matters because it reveals something important about human nature. People often believe they are pursuing things because of what those things are. More often they are pursuing them because of what those things represent. This tendency appears everywhere. A book ignored for months suddenly becomes fascinating when it goes out of print. An opportunity becomes attractive the moment competition increases. Even relationships can seem more valuable when availability changes. The mind reacts quickly to limitation. Something previously overlooked begins to feel significant. Scarcity transforms perception, not through force, not through commands, through meaning. The moment people believe access is narrowing, focus sharpens, attention gathers, energy concentrates, and the more attention something receives, the more valuable it appears. The Stoics recognized this long before modern psychology gave it a name. They understood that the mind easily becomes attached to things it cannot fully control. They also understood that uncertainty often strengthens attachment rather than weakening it. Here the paradox appears. The very uncertainty that should encourage detachment often produces the opposite effect. The mind tightens its grip, attention narrows, desire grows stronger. What began as interest becomes preoccupation. The object starts representing something larger than itself. Security, success, validation, fulfillment. At that point, the pursuit is no longer about the thing itself. It is about the meaning attached to it. A disciplined mind learns to notice this process. It learns to distinguish genuine value from reactive desire. That distinction is difficult because the mind is remarkably skilled at justifying its impulses. Once attention becomes concentrated on something, reasons quickly follow. The desire feels rational, the pursuit feels necessary. People often assume reason came first. More often, emotion arrived first and reason followed behind, quietly constructing a defense. This does not mean people are irrational. It means perception exerts enormous influence over judgment. What feels urgent can easily be mistaken for what is important. The Stoics repeatedly encouraged the examination of impressions for precisely this reason. They understood that the first reaction is not always the most trustworthy one. Between stimulus and response lies an opportunity for awareness, and within that awareness lies freedom. This becomes even more interesting when attention shifts from desire to relationships. Restriction alone cannot explain why some people gain influence while others fail. Another force operates beneath the surface. Most people attempt to earn appreciation by constantly giving. They offer attention, validation, advice, support, and favors in the hope that connection will follow. Sometimes it does, often it does not. Human beings place greater value on what they invest in than on what they simply receive. The Stoics understood that attachment grows through participation. We value what contains our effort. We protect what contains our time. As Seneca observed, wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness. The deeper principle behind that observation is not simply generosity, but involvement. We become connected to what we willingly contribute to. We become emotionally invested in what carries a piece of ourselves. We become emotionally connected to what carries a piece of ourselves. This creates a subtle reversal. Instead of asking how to make people appreciate you, a more useful question emerges. What causes people to become invested in their own perception of you? Once effort enters the equation, something changes. The individual who contributes begins caring more deeply about the outcome. The mind seeks consistency. It wants actions and beliefs to align. When someone invests energy into a relationship, a project, or an idea, they naturally begin adjusting their perception to justify that investment. This explains why attachment often develops gradually rather than suddenly. A conversation, a shared challenge, a thoughtful gesture, a small contribution. None of these moments appear significant on their own. Together they create something powerful. Every investment adds another thread. Eventually those threads become difficult to separate. The relationship feels stronger because it contains evidence of participation. The same principle applies to ideas. Once people invest effort into understanding a perspective, they become more connected to it. And once investment becomes personal, another force emerges: ownership. Few things are defended more fiercely than a conclusion someone believes they reached independently. Direct advice invites evaluation. Direct instruction invites resistance. Observations work differently. They invite reflection. They leave space for discovery. The Stoics understood that truths discovered internally possess greater strength than truths imposed externally. The mind enjoys ownership. It enjoys arriving at conclusions through its own reasoning. This is why the most influential individuals rarely appear obsessed with winning arguments. They focus instead on creating conditions where understanding can emerge naturally. They introduce information. They highlight patterns. They leave clues. They allow the mind to connect the pieces. The final conclusion feels self-generated, and because it feels self-generated, it feels true. The person experiences empowerment rather than persuasion. That difference is profound. People trust what they believe they discovered themselves. They defend what they believe belongs to them. And because ownership runs so deep within human psychology, the strongest influence often feels invisible. If these reflections help sharpen the way you see yourself and the world around you, consider subscribing. Not to collect more information, but to cultivate greater awareness. The Stoics believed that freedom begins in the mind, and every step toward clearer perception is a step toward a freer life. The simple act of subscribing can be a reminder that growth is not a destination, but an ongoing practice of paying closer attention to yourself, your thoughts, and the forces shaping them every day. The strange irony is that freedom becomes stronger when desire is examined rather than immediately satisfied. Most people assume freedom means following whatever impulse feels strongest in the moment. The Stoics saw it differently. They believed freedom emerged from understanding the forces acting upon the mind and choosing responses deliberately. A person who cannot distinguish between authentic values and reactive desires remains vulnerable to circumstances. A person who learns to recognize the difference develops a quieter kind of strength. The world continues presenting opportunities, limitations, and temptations, but their attention is no longer pulled in every direction by appearances alone. They begin seeing how meaning shapes desire, how scarcity shapes attention, and how attention shapes behavior. From that perspective, influence no longer begins when someone tries to convince them. It begins much earlier, at the moment perception starts quietly redefining value. The tendency to pursue what appears restricted explains part of human behavior, but it does not explain why certain individuals seem capable of building trust, loyalty, and influence with remarkable consistency. There is another process taking place beneath the surface, one that is often misunderstood because it appears counterintuitive. Most people believe appreciation is earned by giving more. They offer their time, their attention, their advice, and their approval. They assume that if they invest enough energy into others, affection and respect will naturally follow. Sometimes that happens, often it does not. In many cases, excessive giving creates an unexpected result. Instead of strengthening connection, it weakens it. The more desperately someone seeks approval, the less valuable their presence can appear. This is not because generosity is a flaw, it is because human beings place greater value on what they have personally invested in than on what they have simply received. The Stoics understood that value is rarely determined by possession alone. Value emerges through participation. A person who works tirelessly to cultivate a garden experiences a different relationship with it than someone who merely walks through it. The effort becomes part of the experience. Time, attention, and energy leave an imprint. Something similar happens in relationships. The moment people contribute a part of themselves, even in small ways, the connection begins changing shape. What was once external becomes partially internal. It now contains evidence of their involvement. This matters because human beings have a natural desire for consistency. They prefer their actions and beliefs to align. When they invest effort into something, they unconsciously begin adjusting their perception to justify that investment. The mind seeks harmony. It wants its behavior to make sense. As a result, actions often shape emotions just as much as emotions shape actions. This creates a subtle reversal that many people overlook. Instead of asking how to make someone like you, it becomes more useful to understand how people develop attachment in the first place. Attachment often grows through contribution. The individual who offers a thoughtful recommendation feels more connected to the person who received it. The colleague who dedicates time to helping a project succeed begins caring more deeply about its outcome. The friend who provides support during a difficult moment develops a stronger sense of investment in the relationship. In each case, something meaningful has occurred. Effort has been exchanged. As Aristotle observed, men have a special affection for what they have produced. The insight extends far beyond physical creation. Once effort enters the equation, indifference becomes more difficult to maintain. The mind starts protecting the value of what it has invested in, because to dismiss it would be to dismiss part of its own behavior. This helps explain why some relationships deepen gradually rather than dramatically. There is rarely a single defining moment. Instead, A series of small contributions accumulate over time. A conversation, a favor, a shared challenge, a piece of advice. None of these actions appear significant in isolation. Together they create a foundation. Every investment adds another thread to the connection. Eventually, those threads become difficult to separate. The relationship feels stronger because it contains evidence of mutual participation. The bond is no longer based solely on attraction, admiration, or convenience. It is supported by a history of contributions that both people have made. The more effort someone has invested, the more naturally they begin protecting the relationship itself. A calm observer notices that influence often emerges from this process rather than from direct persuasion. The people who leave lasting impressions are not always the loudest or most charismatic. They are often the ones who create opportunities for meaningful participation. They allow others to contribute. They make room for involvement. They understand that people become attached to what they help build. This principle extends far beyond personal relationships. It appears in communities, organizations, creative projects, and even belief systems. The more someone contributes, the more personally significant the outcome becomes. What begins as casual interest can gradually transform into commitment because investment changes perception. There is an important distinction here. Encouraging participation is not the same as manipulating emotions. The difference lies in intention. Stoic thinking consistently returns to the importance of character and integrity. Understanding how people form attachments should not become an excuse for exploiting them. Instead, it offers insight into how genuine relationships grow. Real connection is strengthened when both sides contribute something meaningful. Mutual investment creates stability because it gives each person a reason to care. The relationship becomes something shared rather than something possessed. This perspective encourages patience. It reminds us that trust cannot be demanded. It must be built through consistent action over time. What makes this dynamic especially powerful is that it often operates quietly. People rarely notice the moment attachment begins deepening. They do not wake up one day and consciously decide to care more. The shift happens gradually as investments accumulate. Each action reinforces the last. Consistency begins performing work that persuasion never could. A person who repeatedly contributes their time, attention, and effort starts seeing the relationship through a different lens. Their behavior becomes evidence. The mind looks at that evidence and draws conclusions. If I continue investing, this must matter to me. If it matters to me, I should protect it. What begins as a simple action evolves into a deeper emotional commitment. This reveals something important about influence and human nature. Lasting influence rarely depends on forcing agreement. It often grows from creating conditions where people willingly invest part of themselves. Once that investment exists, the relationship acquires momentum. The desire for consistency encourages further involvement. The emotional connection becomes stronger because it is supported by action rather than fantasy. People trust what they have participated in creating. They feel responsible for what contains their effort. And because effort leaves traces within the mind, those traces continue shaping perception long after the original action has passed. The result is not immediate obedience or dramatic transformation. It is something quieter and far more enduring. A sense of personal investment that deepens naturally over time, strengthening connection from the inside rather than attempting to impose it from the outside. The moment effort becomes personal, influence gains stability. Yet there is something even more powerful than investment. People can become attached to relationships, communities, and shared goals because they have contributed to them, but nothing seems to inspire commitment quite like an idea that feels self-generated. Human beings defend their possessions, their reputations, and their beliefs with remarkable determination, but beliefs often occupy a unique position because they become intertwined with identity itself. When a conclusion feels like it emerged from one's own reasoning, it is no longer experienced as an external suggestion. It becomes part of the internal landscape. Criticism directed toward that conclusion can feel strangely personal because the idea is no longer viewed as information. It is viewed as evidence of independent judgment. This is why direct persuasion often produces mixed results. The moment people sense they are being pushed toward a conclusion, a part of the mind instinctively steps back to evaluate it. Resistance appears, not necessarily because the idea is wrong, but because autonomy feels threatened. This reaction reveals something important about how people process information. Most individuals want to feel capable of thinking for themselves. They want their choices to reflect their own understanding rather than someone else's influence. The Stoics recognized this deeply. Their teachings were rarely presented as rigid commands to be obeyed without reflection. Instead, they encouraged examination. They encouraged observation. They encouraged individuals to arrive at understanding through their own reasoning. As Epictetus put it, no man is free who is not master of himself. That mastery begins with independent judgment. A truth discovered internally carries a different weight than one merely accepted from authority. It becomes anchored through personal experience. The insight feels earned. Because it feels earned, it becomes difficult to abandon. This principle extends far beyond philosophy. It appears in everyday conversations, relationships, leadership, education, and nearly every environment where ideas are exchanged. The mind values ownership, even when that ownership exists only in perception. Consider how differently people respond to instructions compared to observations. An instruction often creates a clear division between the speaker and the listener. One person appears to possess the answer while the other is expected to receive it. Even when the advice is useful, the structure itself can create distance. Observations function differently. They invite reflection rather than compliance. They present information without demanding a conclusion. This subtle difference changes the entire psychological experience. Instead of feeling directed, the other person remains engaged in the process of discovery. Their attention turns inward. They begin connecting ideas, comparing experiences, and drawing their own inferences. The conclusion that eventually emerges feels more convincing because it appears to belong to them. The mind naturally trusts what it believes it has uncovered through its own effort. This is why some of the most influential individuals rarely spend much time trying to win arguments. They understand that victory in an argument does not necessarily create lasting conviction. A person may verbally agree while remaining internally unconvinced. The deeper objective is not agreement, it is understanding. And understanding grows most effectively when people participate in creating it. Rather than forcing conclusions, influential individuals often focus on shaping conditions. They introduce relevant information. They offer perspectives. They highlight patterns that might otherwise go unnoticed. Then they allow the process to unfold naturally. What appears passive from the outside is often highly intentional. Instead of controlling conclusions directly, they create environments where certain conclusions become easier to reach than others. The effectiveness of this approach comes from the way the human mind organizes information. People are natural pattern seekers. Faced with scattered observations, they instinctively search for coherence. They look for connections between events, ideas, and experiences. Once enough pieces are present, the mind begins constructing a larger picture. Importantly, that picture feels self-generated because the final step occurred internally. The individual experiences the conclusion as a product of personal reasoning rather than external influence. This creates a sense of confidence that direct persuasion rarely achieves. Confidence grows not because the conclusion is necessarily correct, but because the person feels responsible for arriving at it. Ownership transforms belief into something more durable. There is a practical lesson hidden within this process. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy attempting to convince others by increasing pressure. They repeat arguments, strengthen claims, and become increasingly forceful. Yet greater pressure often produces greater resistance. The Stoics repeatedly emphasized that control over other minds is limited. What remains within reach is the ability to present ideas with clarity and integrity. Beyond that point, understanding must develop internally. This perspective encourages patience. It shifts attention away from forcing outcomes and toward creating conditions that support reflection. The goal becomes less about immediate agreement and more about planting ideas that can grow through independent thought. This requires restraint, which is often more difficult than persuasion itself. There is a natural temptation to explain everything, defend every position, and eliminate every uncertainty. Yet people rarely learn most deeply when every answer is provided. Growth frequently occurs during the process of connecting ideas independently. Space becomes valuable. Silence becomes valuable. Reflection becomes valuable. The person who understands this does not rush to fill every gap. They recognize that some conclusions become stronger precisely because they were not handed over fully formed. Instead, they emerged gradually through personal discovery. The result is a form of influence that feels almost invisible. No confrontation is necessary. No obvious persuasion takes place. The individual experiences empowerment rather than pressure because the conclusion appears to originate from within. That feeling matters. People protect insights they believe they earned. They remain committed to ideas that reflect their own reasoning. And because the mind values ownership so deeply, the strongest influence is often not the force that pushes someone toward a belief. It is the quiet presence that allows them to arrive there themselves, carrying with them the confidence that the journey belonged entirely to them. As ideas become more personally meaningful, another pattern begins to reveal itself. People resist pressure when they can see it clearly, but they also resist displays of obvious superiority. This creates a strange paradox. Many assume influence comes from appearing powerful, knowledgeable, or exceptional. They believe competence must be displayed to be recognized. They believe strength must be visible to be respected. Yet human beings are remarkably sensitive to status. The moment someone appears to place themselves above others, subtle reactions begin emerging beneath the surface. Comparison appears. Defensiveness appears. Insecurity sometimes appears. Even when the display of competence is entirely justified, it can create distance. The focus shifts away from the idea being communicated and toward the person communicating it. Instead of engaging with the message, people begin reacting to the perceived status difference. The conversation changes without anyone noticing. What could have become cooperation quietly transforms into evaluation. The Stoics were deeply aware of this tendency. Their teachings repeatedly emphasized humility, not because achievement lacked value, but because attachment to recognition often distracts from what truly matters. Vanity places the self at the center of attention. It encourages people to perform competence rather than apply it. The more energy someone spends proving their value, the less energy remains available for creating value. This observation becomes especially important when examining how trust develops. People are naturally drawn toward those who appear secure in themselves. Not those who constantly announce their strengths, but those who seem comfortable without needing constant validation. Quiet confidence produces a different effect than visible self-promotion. It feels stable, it feels grounded. Most importantly, it feels non-threatening. History repeatedly offers examples of this principle in action. Some of the most influential individuals were initially underestimated. Their strength was not hidden because they lacked ability. It was hidden because they understood the advantage of patience. While others competed for attention, they focused on preparation. While others rushed to demonstrate capability, they concentrated on developing it. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. The same principle applies here. People expected influence to arrive loudly. They expected authority to seek recognition. When neither occurred, they lowered their guard. The individual who appeared modest was often granted access, trust, and opportunity that would have been denied to someone openly displaying ambition. By the time others recognized what was happening, foundations had already been established. Progress had already been made. There is something psychologically interesting about this dynamic. Human beings tend to respond more positively to those who make them feel comfortable than to those who make them feel inferior. Obvious displays of superiority can unintentionally trigger comparison. The mind begins measuring itself against the person standing before it. Attention shifts inward. Instead of listening, people start evaluating their own position. This creates friction, not always openly. Often it remains hidden beneath the surface. A person may admire competence while simultaneously feeling uncomfortable around it. They may acknowledge expertise while resisting its influence. This is one reason visible strength does not always produce the results people expect. Strength can attract attention, but attention alone is not the same as trust. The truly capable individual often understands something that others miss. Competence does not disappear when it is not displayed. Knowledge does not become weaker because it remains quiet. Skill does not require constant announcement to remain effective. In many situations, restraint creates more opportunities than self-promotion ever could. This requires discipline because the desire for recognition is deeply human. Most people want their efforts acknowledged. They want their abilities seen and appreciated. The challenge is learning when visibility serves a purpose and when it merely satisfies the ego. The Stoics consistently encourage distinguishing between these two motivations. One contributes to meaningful action, the other often leads toward distraction. A subtle form of strength emerges when a person becomes comfortable allowing their results to speak before their reputation does. This does not mean pretending to be less capable than reality. It means understanding that capability and display are not the same thing. Someone who constantly emphasizes their own importance may gain attention, but they also invite scrutiny. Expectations rise, resistance rises, competition rises. The person who quietly develops competence often avoids these obstacles entirely. They move forward without becoming the center of unnecessary attention. Their energy remains focused on what they are building rather than how they are being perceived. This approach becomes especially effective because human beings often form assumptions based on appearances. They expect confidence to look a certain way. They expect authority to sound a certain way. When someone does not fit those expectations, they are frequently underestimated. Most people view underestimation as a disadvantage. In reality, it can create freedom. Expectations become lower. Defenses become weaker. Opportunities become easier to navigate. The individual gains room to learn, observe, and improve without attracting the pressures that often accompany visible status. While others are focused on appearances, they are focused on preparation. Over time, the difference becomes difficult to ignore. Results begin accumulating. Trust begins accumulating. Influence begins accumulating. Not because it was demanded, but because it was earned quietly through consistency and patience. People gradually recognize competence that does not seek attention. In many cases, they trust it more because it appears genuine. There is no performance to evaluate, no obvious attempt to impress, only evidence. The individual becomes respected not for claiming ability, but for demonstrating it repeatedly when it matters. As influence becomes less visible, its effects often become more powerful. A person may initially pay attention to an idea because it seems interesting. They may invest time in it because it feels valuable. They may even defend it because they believe they arrived at it independently. Yet there comes a point where something deeper begins to happen. The idea stops existing as a separate object and starts becoming part of how they see themselves. This shift changes everything. At first, people evaluate decisions based on practical outcomes. They ask whether something is useful, beneficial, or rewarding. Once identity becomes involved, those questions gradually move into the background. The focus changes. The decision is no longer judged primarily by what it produces. It is judged by what it represents. The action begins to feel connected to character. It starts reflecting a personal story about who someone believes they are. And when that happens, influence reaches a level that logic alone rarely achieves. Human beings do not simply act according to facts. They act according to the meaning they attach to those facts. Two people can encounter the same situation and respond in completely different ways because they interpret it through different identities. One person sees challenge as an opportunity to grow. Another sees it as proof of failure. One person views discipline as freedom. Another views it as restriction. The external circumstances may be identical, yet the internal narrative changes everything. The Stoics understood this deeply. They recognized that perception shapes behavior more than circumstances themselves. A person's actions often follow the story they tell themselves about who they are, what they value, and what kind of life they are attempting to build. This is why identity exerts such extraordinary influence. It provides a framework through which decisions acquire meaning. Consider how difficult it is to convince someone to act against a deeply held self-image. Facts alone often struggle to create change because facts operate at a different level. A person may acknowledge information intellectually while rejecting it emotionally if it conflicts with the story they have constructed about themselves. The mind naturally seeks consistency. It prefers harmony between beliefs, actions, and identity. When a new idea aligns with that identity, acceptance feels effortless. When it challenges identity directly, resistance appears almost automatically. This resistance is rarely experienced as stubbornness. It feels like self-protection. The individual is not merely defending an opinion. They are defending a version of themselves. The distinction matters because it explains why some arguments never seem to make progress despite strong evidence. This tendency can be observed in countless areas of life. A person who views themselves as independent may embrace a difficult path simply because it reinforces that identity. Someone who sees themselves as resilient may persist through hardship that would discourage others. Another who identifies strongly with being knowledgeable may resist information that threatens their sense of competence. In each case, behavior follows perception. The action itself becomes secondary. What matters most is maintaining consistency with the internal story. Once identity enters the equation, decisions become emotionally charged in ways that are often difficult to recognize. People begin protecting narratives with greater intensity than they protect facts because narratives provide structure. They help answer a fundamental question about who they are. The Stoics approached this principle in a particularly thoughtful way. Rather than focusing on controlling behavior directly, they emphasized developing character. Their reasoning was simple. Actions become more stable when they emerge from identity rather than external pressure. A person who values wisdom naturally seeks understanding. A person who values self-control naturally becomes more disciplined. The behavior is supported by something deeper than temporary motivation. It reflects an internal standard. This creates consistency because the individual is no longer relying entirely on circumstances to determine their actions. They are guided by a sense of who they aspire to become. There is also a caution hidden within this understanding. Because identity is so powerful, it can be shaped intentionally or unintentionally by the environments people inhabit. Repeated messages, social expectations, and cultural narratives gradually influence how individuals see themselves. Over time, these influences become internalized. They stop feeling external and begin feeling personal. A belief repeated often enough can become part of identity without ever being consciously examined. This is one reason self-awareness remains so important. The ability to question inherited assumptions protects against adopting identities that do not genuinely reflect one's values. Without reflection, it becomes easy to mistake conditioning for authenticity. The deeper lesson is not that identity should be manipulated. It is that identity should be understood. People rarely defend facts with the same energy they defend their sense of self. They will reconsider information, revise opinions, and update conclusions. Identity operates differently. It sits closer to the center of experience. When actions become connected to pride, wisdom, integrity, independence, or character, they acquire emotional weight that facts alone cannot provide. The individual no longer feels pushed toward a decision. They feel drawn toward consistency. And because consistency feels natural, the influence shaping that decision often becomes invisible. What remains visible is only the conviction itself, experienced not as persuasion, but as an expression of who they believe they are. This process unfolds so quietly that it rarely attracts attention. A statement heard once may be dismissed. Heard 10 times, it becomes familiar. Heard 100 times, it begins feeling self-evident. The mind has a natural tendency to trust what it encounters repeatedly. Familiarity creates comfort, and comfort is frequently mistaken for truth. This does not happen because people lack intelligence. It happens because the human mind is designed to conserve energy. Constantly questioning every impression would be exhausting. As a result, repeated ideas often pass through mental defenses more easily than unfamiliar ones. Over time, they settle into the background of thought. They become assumptions rather than arguments. The shift is subtle. The individual no longer experiences the idea as something encountered externally. It starts feeling like part of their own perspective. Modern life makes this challenge even more significant. Every day people encounter thousands of messages competing for attention. Some are obvious, many are not. News headlines, social media feeds, entertainment, advertising, workplace culture, social expectations, and algorithmic recommendations all contribute to an environment that constantly suggests what should matter, what should be feared, what should be desired, and what should be ignored. None of these influences operate in isolation. Together they create patterns. Those patterns gradually shape perception. The process is rarely dramatic enough to notice in a single moment. It becomes visible only over time. Looking back, a person may discover that certain opinions, ambitions, and assumptions appeared so gradually that they never seemed to arrive at all. The same principle applies to fear. Fears often feel deeply personal and unquestionably real. Yet many fears gain strength through repetition and reinforcement. A message encountered repeatedly can transform a possibility into a perceived certainty. The mind begins preparing for threats that may never arrive. As Seneca warned, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Anxiety grows not because reality has changed, but because attention has been directed repeatedly toward a particular concern. The more attention something receives, the larger it appears. This creates a cycle in which perception shapes emotion, and emotion reinforces perception. Breaking that cycle requires awareness. It requires the willingness to step back and examine whether a fear reflects reality or merely repetition. This is why self-examination remains one of the most powerful disciplines available. It is not an exercise in doubt for its own sake. It is an exercise in clarity. The goal is not to reject every influence, but to understand which influences deserve acceptance and which do not. After examining how attention is guided, how investment creates attachment, how identity shapes behavior, and how unseen influences quietly enter the mind, a final realization begins to emerge. It is a realization that often feels less exciting than the promise of controlling others, yet infinitely more valuable. Most people become interested in influence because they want to understand how human behavior works. They want to know why people make certain decisions. They want to understand persuasion, attraction, leadership, and social dynamics. Yet the deeper someone travels into that territory, the more they encounter an unexpected truth. The most important mind to understand is not someone else's, it is their own. Every principle that explains the behavior of others also applies inwardly. Every mechanism that shapes decisions externally operates internally as well. The search for influence eventually becomes a search for self-understanding. This is where many people take a wrong turn. Once they discover how emotions can be triggered, how perceptions can be shaped, and how reactions can be anticipated, they become fascinated by control. The focus shifts outward. Attention becomes centered on techniques, strategies, and methods. Yet there is a limitation hidden inside that approach. Anyone can learn techniques. Anyone can memorize patterns. Anyone can imitate confidence, repeat persuasive language, or create carefully calculated impressions. These skills may produce results for a time, but they remain dependent on circumstances. The individual is still reacting to the environment even while attempting to shape it. Their attention remains trapped by external outcomes. They may appear powerful on the surface while remaining vulnerable beneath it. The Stoics viewed this as a fragile form of strength because it depends too heavily on things that can never be fully controlled. A different kind of strength emerges when attention turns inward. Instead of asking how to influence others, a person begins asking how to avoid being governed by every impulse, every emotion, and every external pressure that crosses their path. This question changes everything. The objective is no longer domination, it becomes clarity. The goal is no longer controlling reactions in other people, it becomes understanding reactions within oneself. This shift may seem subtle, but its consequences are profound. A person who cannot govern their own emotions remains vulnerable regardless of how much influence they possess over others. Anger can control them, fear can control them, pride can control them, approval can control them. Their behavior still depends on forces operating outside conscious awareness. They remain moved by currents they do not fully understand. Over time, this practice creates a different relationship with the world. The person still participates fully in life. They still engage in conversations, relationships, ambitions, and responsibilities. Nothing external necessarily changes. What changes is the level of consciousness brought to those experiences. They become less likely to chase every desire simply because it appears attractive, less likely to fear every possibility simply because it appears threatening, less likely to adopt every opinion simply because it appears popular. Their decisions become more intentional because they are no longer being carried entirely by the momentum of external influences. The ability to pause, examine, and choose becomes a source of stability. This is why genuine understanding often produces humility rather than arrogance. The more a person learns about human psychology, the more clearly they see their own vulnerabilities. They recognize how easily perception can be shaped. They recognize how often emotions attempt to present themselves as facts. They recognize how frequently external pressures compete for attention. This awareness does not create cynicism. It creates caution. It encourages patience. Most importantly, it encourages responsibility. The focus shifts away from changing everyone else and toward maintaining clarity within oneself. The final reversal is therefore much simpler than it first appears. True influence does not begin with controlling others. It begins with refusing to be controlled unnecessarily. It begins with recognizing persuasion without becoming captive to it. It begins with understanding desire without automatically obeying it. It begins with observing fear without surrendering to it. The individual who develops this capacity occupies a unique position. They can participate in the world without being completely absorbed by it. They can understand influence without becoming enslaved by it. While others are pulled from one reaction to the next, they remain anchored in awareness. And in a world filled with forces competing constantly for attention, that quiet clarity may be the most powerful form of influence that exists. The greatest victory is not persuading another mind, it is refusing to surrender your own. In a world filled with noise, pressure, and endless attempts to shape how you think, the ability to remain clear, deliberate, and grounded is a rare form of freedom. That is the path the Stoics pointed toward, not control over others, but mastery over yourself. If this reflection resonated, take a moment to continue the journey by watching one of the suggested videos on the screen. Each one explores another timeless lesson in human nature, self-mastery, and inner strength.